All right, so welcome to Module 3, Part 2 of the lectures on the implementation and documentation of NEPA. We'll talk a little bit more about an overview and start to go into some of these different levels of analysis. So NEPA is about documentation. Section 102 defines these levels of intensity of analysis. Is like how I like to think about them. So the least amount of intensity of analysis done is a categorical exclusion, or the CE. So a short document that explains that the proposed action is a type of action that does not require NEPA analysis. The environmental assessment is a screening document exploring the possibility that a significant impact may occur. In the most intense level of the analysis, the environmental impact statement, the EIS, a detailed analysis of feasible alternatives, significant impacts of those alternative, cumulative effects analysis, and justification for the preferred alternative of the action. So Section 102 created these categorical exclusions, actions that can be, as it says in the name, categorically excluded from NEPA. So no EIS is required. So minor, routine, ongoing activities with no potential effects. So we talked about examples of it's meant to be like painting the painting the office at the or the outside of the building at the Forest Service. Things like that. Things that are small actions that are taken by a federal agency but not really deemed to have any potentially significant impacts. Small roads, things like that. So there's been some agency-specific exclusions that have happened over time, like Bush's Bush's Healthy Forest Initiative exempted 1,000-acre and under treatments on U.S. forest land. There's been exemptions by Congress. Like the Trans-Alaska Oil Pipeline, it was exempted from NEPA. So it largely depends on what the goals of the government are at that time, and if they deem that NEPA may not be necessary, they can actually exempt the NEPA process from taking place. And also, so statutory conflicts. So where a higher level of government kind of trumps a lower level. In this case, things that existed prior to the NEPA document, the NEPA Act. So as I've mentioned, and as we mentioned that some of these CEs are highly controversial. We've talked about these some of these examples before. Actions that are taken as a group will not have significant impacts, can be categorically excluded from NEPA analysis, and so this opens a door to some potentially dangerous interpretation of what that means. And so these categorical exclusions can still be litigated and pursued by groups and sued to try and say that they should not be categorically excluded. So drilling down a little bit into the keys, of EAs, and also kind of just understanding what they are. The agency prepares EAs to determine if there will be a significant impact, and if that needs to trigger the more complex analysis of an EIS. And so the order of magnitude is significant with the amount of EAs that are prepared compared to the amount of EIS. EIS can be extremely costly, cost millions of dollars by the federal agencies. So what are the keys of these analyses? There's an evaluation of the context of the proposal and the alternatives. There's evaluation of the intensity of the proposal and the alternatives, and that these direct, indirect, and cumulative effects of the proposal are identified. So how is that expressed in the EA? So the contents of of an EA are a purpose and need section for the proposed action. Reasonable alternatives are outlined in the proposed action. Probable environmental impacts of the proposed action or alternative, and then finally all the agencies and persons that were consulted in the preparation of the EA must be documented. So then we reach a kind of a fork in the road. Once an EA is completed, two things can happen. So an agency can issue a FONSI, as shown on right here, of finding of no significant impact, and they do not have to do an EIS. Or as we talked about earlier, there can be a mitigated FONSI, or two, that there may be a significant impact, and they need to complete an environmental impact statement. So the environmental impact statement is the kind of the heart of NEPA, what it was originally written for. It's a document justifying the proposed action of the federal agency. It justifies why the proposed action was chosen over different alternatives, and is a disclosure document of information and data used to make the decision. So now looking at kind of the major components of an environmental impact statement, where a significant impact is deemed to occur. And so there's a scoping process, then draft EIS is developed with alternatives, there's a period of public comment, a final EIS is issued with response to the comments, and then a record of decision is issued. And so this content, it's similar to an EA, but just a more in-depth introduction, purpose and need. Different alternatives are analyzed. The affected environment is then analyzed and broken down by different resource type. And also then each resource type is also shown what those environmental consequences are. So there may be a section on air quality. So it'll show what air quality environment is affected, and then what are the environmental consequences that are going to happen because of the proposed action. So some of the assumptions behind an EIS, as shown in section 102. So we're comparing alternatives, based on an objective and unbiased science, which can be a challenge, and also that we're comparing using a common metric. Usually, it's dollars is an example, or if we're talking about air quality, the same metric is used across the project. Agency and the ID team, which we'll talk more about, is trusted by the public and politicians, and that the preferred alternative will be implemented. So that's the project that actually will happen. Which brings us to the close of this lecture and talking about the NEPA is about procedure and not about outcomes. In working with a lot of comments on federal projects, a lot of comments that I've reviewed is that a lot of the public and people submit their comment about the NEPA document saying, "Oh, we vote for the no action alternative," that nothing happens, thinking that NEPA is about making some kind of decision about whether the project is going to take place. And that's not actually what NEPA is about. It's about the procedure and the disclosure. It does not make a decision about whether the project should actually take place.